Yeah, my name is Lee Woodyear, and I'm the Global Communications Officer for the United Nations Mine Action Service. And we've just completed, just a few minutes ago, we completed the 22nd National Directors Meeting of Mine Action and UN Advisors. And what that consists of is that all of the affected states around the world, globally, who are affected by explosive hazards or landmines, come together once a year in order to basically share best practices, lessons learned, and update. This meeting this year, the 22nd one, which just concluded, was aimed at looking at the question of victim assistance and survivors. And so it was really looking at the question of not just after you save a life, so we can clear landmines, but there are a bunch of people who get wounded. People get wounded right at this point, basically one a day, or maybe even a little bit more, statistically. But what happens is when they're wounded and they live, then the question is, what do we do? How do we take care of them? And so what we saw was that obviously with what infrastructure exists in order to change the prosthetic, because if you have missing a leg and it's say it's above the knee, it's a very complicated process to get a prosthetic that fits. And then after fitting the prosthetic, as the person grows and learning how to use it, they have to change it. So it's a long-term thing. So our real goal here was to talk about how do we take care of survivors of explosive blasts for the longer term. Well, the conclusion, the biggest part of it was that the member states who participated, the donors who participated, and obviously the actors, ourselves, and the bunch of UN agencies, there's 12 UN agencies that actually have a part of their mandate to be touching on mine action, and also all the non-governmental organizations. They really raised the issue to start moving forward to talk about what kind of money is needed and what type of treasury resources, financial resources, but also what type of techniques and what type of infrastructure needs to be built in order to help people who are survivors of an explosive accident. I think that our message was, and what we advocate for this year is very much, think about the survivors. I mean, I think the greatest quote that came out of this week was saying that why save a life if you don't give a life back? So it's the idea that somebody's alive still, but they lost a leg or they lost an arm. Now we need to make sure that they can live a life, meaning that they can work or walk or participate in the society economically, culturally, socially, as opposed to just I'm alive, but I can't do anything because I'm missing my leg, or because I don't know how to use this thing, or because I'm on crutches and I can't get around because there's no way to move around in my area where I live. So the point is to say, okay, we've saved a life, but now the next step is we must give a life back because the life has changed. And that takes investment, it takes thinking, it takes processing, it takes programming. It just doesn't happen automatically. Technology is always going to be changing and making things hopefully easier, but then you always have that learning curve that you have to teach people how to use it. And again, landmines are everywhere around the world. They're in countries that are in the process of developing. They're in post-conflict environments where there's not really that much left as far as an infrastructure goes. So technology is always helpful. And we always have different events on that when we do these meetings to hear what are people using, how do you use flying cameras or drones or different types of X-ray machines that can see through things. But we also have an evolving threat. So today, landmines traditionally were either anti-tank or anti-personnel, and they were small things, and you put them in the ground, and when you stepped on them, you hit off the detonator, and they blew up. Okay, today you have improvised explosive devices, and they're made with infrared, they're made with pressure plates, which means you take, for example, 2 saw blades, and you put a little teeny something between the saw blades so they don't touch, and you bury them under the ground. And then when you step on that saw blade, it makes a circuit, and the thing explodes that way. Or infrared light, so if you cross through a light, or they can be operated by telephone, so somebody will have a telephone attached to maybe a 20-pound bomb or missile, and the second you walk by it, they call the phone, and that sets off an electric circuit, and it blows up. Or they could be in a car, like a car bomb. So that new technology is needed for that, also for the standards of how you clear it. Because what we saw here was that there's some of these little teeny electrical circuits, just a little teeny wire trapped there, that if that wire breaks, and they're strung along a line like 20 meters of this wire, any one of those little things breaks, the contact, it explodes. How do you see it? It's very hard to see. What's going to detect it? A metal detector doesn't detect it. It's too little amount of metal. So that is a whole other level of what you have to deal with when you're going into places that have been booby-trapped, such as what we deal with in Iraq and in Syria. I would just thank the Chinese government for their support and for the fact that they participate in peacekeeping operations and that they send very professional men and women to come and work with peacekeeping in the places we do it, and their support for the UN and their support for a mine-free world.
Okay, I'm Wil Meurer. I'm Dutch. I work in New York. I work for UNMAS, the United Nations Mine Action Service. My profession is I'm EOD, Explosive Ordnance Disposal, and I work as an IED Threat Mitigation Advisor.
How do you think about this UNMAS meeting this year?
Oh, it was a very beneficial meeting on many levels. We try to connect to everybody that's in mine action, and as you could see, every company, a lot of countries were all here. I think we were able to connect, bring the message that we have to work together. So I think it was really, really good. For me, it's very sad to see the people that are suffering because there's a threat. And I can tell you many stories what I encountered. But for me as a EOD operator, being able to take care of a problem and giving people the things they need, so by giving them access to a building that was filled with explosives, it's very gratifying. So being able to create a safe environment, to be able to create a safe home, that gives you a real good feeling.
Did you worry about your life when you're doing this kind of detection work?
No, if you do the work, you don't fear for your life. The work is not without danger. But if you do it in the right way, then the risk is limited. The risk is bigger for the people who don't know what the threat is. I do know what the threat is. I have much of the equipment available to be able to work safe. So the biggest problem is for the people that don't have the equipment. For me, there's no real threat.
And about a personal question, I'm curious, how is your choice to become kind of in the field doing this kind of detection? What make you?
I have a military background, so from the military, I'm EOD trained, and when I was young and joined the military, I was really fascinated by the work they do. Now I work at the United Nations at the Mine Action Service, and if I look at the dedication of the people trying to solve the problem, that is so motivating. So the people you work with and the assistance and support you are able to give, that's a big motivation for everybody. I think if you imagine you would be able to create a safer place for people that really need it, that gives a very gratifying feeling, and that's why I do the work.
How do you think, like, to raise the awareness of like the mine issues globally?
Yeah, it's difficult to raise awareness, but I think it should speak for itself, because if you see how many people are really suffering, there's a lot happening in the field. A lot of survivors, people who are very, very hard confronted with the threat that is formed by explosive remnants of war, landmines, and of course improvised explosive devices.
Right. For example, like say in South Asia and then like in the South America, like there are a lot of issues still remaining. Mm-hmm. Like what do you think like the government or NGOs could do like to help them to be better?
I'm UN staff today. I'm coordinating the UN Disarmament Fellowship Program. It's a program which was established by the first special session of the General Assembly on Disarmament back 40 years ago. Okay, and I'm doing other disarmament work here with the Office for Disarmament Affairs of the United Nations in Geneva. Before that, prior to joining the UN, I was with the National Diplomatic Service of my country, doing always multilateral diplomacy, mostly disarmament, human rights, migration, different topics.
Can you hold that and talk about what is this? What is this?
This is a cluster munition. This is submunition actually. This is a weapon which is today prohibited for many states, not for all. For those who joined this convention. It's quite a dangerous weapon because...
what's the name of it?
It's a cluster munition, called cluster munition. It's Convention on the Cluster Munitions, the treaty which is prohibiting them. what is the problem is that basically it's a weapon which consists of a container, a box. It may be a box fixed to a helicopter, it may be a missile, it may be a bomb, it may be whatever, and which is full of these bomblets. This is actually the real danger. It's clustered because it will open at certain distance from the Earth. It's air delivered, and then when falling down, this particular one will spin, and it's an area effect. One bomb may cover a whole stadium. One bomb may have several hundreds of this inside. So they will be dispersed over a large area and then destroy everything. It's a carpet bombing. You have seen that probably on the internet. It's like a carpet, destroying absolutely everything, killing everyone, destroying all the armed vehicles and everything like that. The problem is that many of these weapons have a very high failure rate. It may, officially it's like 1-2%, but it may be 10, 20, up to 40%. So you can imagine that if you have one bomb with 100 of these bomblets, and then you have 40% failure rate, that makes 40 of them will stay active on the ground, like mines, basically. Will be very similar in this case, like mines, because they are designed to explode upon impact, but this will not happen. But they're active, so they're staying there. You see, it's like nice shape. Children will be interested, and then the children will approach it and will be killed, because this will explode. There are countries like Laos, which is very heavily contaminated. There are millions of this still. More than 40 years after the end of the war, there are still a lot of them fighting. Many of them are still active. Each weapon has a failure rate. Simply in this specific weapon, this failure rate is, in most of the cases, very high. Well, there are some cluster munitions which are very sophisticated, which will have, first of all, they will not have the area effect, because you have cluster munitions with a few only submunition inside, with many sensors, with individual basically targeting. Usually they will be excluded from this convention, but yes, this exists also, which are much safer. But the one which were used for many, many years in many states, and which are in the arsenal still of many countries, quite often they are considered dangerous. And this is a problem. This is why the international community at a certain moment decided that it's important to address this weapon before it becomes a problem like the one with the anti-personnel landmines. Because I don't know how much you know the anti-personnel landmines, but somewhere in the 90s, the international community faced a huge humanitarian disaster associated with the use of anti-personnel landmines. Simply they are cheap, they are easy to produce, easy to use, and the mine is a delayed action weapon. I mean, it's a weapon which you activate, you put on the ground or underground, and it will be activated by the victim, which may be tomorrow, but it may be in 20 years. That means that in many cases, many, many years after the end of the conflict, these weapons are still active, they're still in the ground, and they cause a lot of suffering. Most of them will not even kill you, they will maim you, that will lose part of your body, or they will kill you also. And we have many, many thousands of victims every year. And then this is also have an impact on their communities, on their societies. You understand that in many cases these are countries which are not so rich. So the fact that they have also to support many, many victims is creating additional also economic problem. I have here a small model of anti-personnel mine. Okay, this is it. This is a former Soviet mine, usually known as butterfly, BFM-1. You see it's a very small weapon. It's created in purpose not to kill but to maim, because the psychological effect of seeing someone who is not killed is much bigger than the psychological effect of like all other weapons. So it was developed in purpose to be much smaller, extremely dangerous. Officially, it's a defensive weapon. It's a weapon which is the purpose of which is to protect military objectives, borders, to protect anti-vehicle mines, bigger weapons. But then the problem is that it became so popular, it's so easy to produce, it's not a big technological challenge. Many armed non-state actors are producing different types of anti-personnel mines. And on top of it, although there is a requirement, in most of the cases, they don't keep records of the exact location of these mines, which means that once the war is over, they don't know where to go and look for them. They don't know how many mines have been put in place. They have no idea. Even when they had their records of the places, you have different conditions. I mean, environment, relief, whatever. So they're moving sometimes. For instance, in the desert in Sahara, you have mines from the Second World War, which sometimes will appear on the surface and then they will disappear because the sounds are moving. And so it's really dangerous because it's of this delay action and because it cannot discriminate. It cannot distinguish between a military and a child. I mean, you step on it. There are different ways of triggering, but basically the problem is that it will stay for many years. People will not even remember that there was war there, but the mine will still be active. And then you step on it, and you're dead or injured. And as I said, there are many of them. There used to be over 110 million placed around the world. That means not in all stocks. On stocks you have much more, but already activated, placed on the ground or underground. And many of them are still there, despite all the efforts of the international community for 20 years now. This year we are celebrating the 20th anniversary, actually, of the entry into force of the convention, which prohibits these weapons and requires all the states parties to destroy all the stocks and to clear all the minefields. It's one of the most successful conventions and a very good example of how disarmament helps development. Because by clearing, destroying the minefields, destroying all the mines, you basically release the land for its normal purposes to be used for whatever, farming or whatever. Also, you create the possibility for people to go back to their homes, which otherwise, where there is mine, they cannot do. I mean, mine action in the understanding of the UN consists of 5 pillars, 5 different activities: the destruction of the stockpiles, the clearance of the minefields, victim assistance, advocacy and mine risk education. Basically, they are activities which we consider altogether important for addressing the problem associated with the use of landmines, not only landmines, also explosive remnants of war. This convention imposes specific obligations to its states parties. If you join the convention as a country, in your country you have to destroy within 4 years all the stocks, all the stockpiles you have on mines, which is usually feasible. But it has also to clear within 10 years all the minefields. That means and sometimes, first of all, you don't even know where the exact minefields are. There is a lot of work in advance to find the minefields, and then it's very easy to place a mine, to activate it. It may take days and weeks to find it back.
Here is a list, very interesting. It's about not party for the global anti-personnel mine. For example, let's say from the list they include Armenia, Azerbaijan, China, Cuba, Egypt, Georgia, India, Iran, Israel, Kyrgyzstan, Laos, Lebanon, Libya, Morocco, Myanmar, North Korea, Pakistan, Russia, South Korea, Syria, Uzbekistan, and Vietnam. It seems to be a huge list.
It is, although this is quite a popular convention. We have 164 states. What is interesting, of course, important part of our work is advocacy. We try to work for the universalization of this treaty. You see, the list is long, but what is interesting is that the reasons may be different for a state not to join. For instance, just as an example, usually Azerbaijan and Armenia, they usually refer to the conflict between them, and that they simply, the security situation today is such that does not allow them to basically to join, not yet. There are other countries which will refer to the long borders they have with other states, sometimes thousands of kilometers. Laos, for instance, you mentioned also Laos. For instance, Laos is an extremely heavily contaminated country, but mostly with explosive remnants of war, not with mines. I mean, it's like mines are very, very small percentage of the contamination, is mostly border contamination. This convention imposes specific obligations to its states parties. If you join the convention as a country, in your country you have to destroy within 4 years all the stocks, all the stockpiles you have on mines, which is usually feasible. But it has also to clear within 10 years all the minefields. That means and sometimes, first of all, you don't even know where the exact minefields are. There is a lot of work in advance to find the minefields, and then it's very easy to place a mine, to activate it. It may take days and weeks to find it back.
How do you evaluate the Chinese government performance in the past few years in terms of mining?
Well, China is quite active actually in mine action, and providing also a lot of support to many states through mine action. I mean, not through the convention itself, but the convention is a good forum, a place where states in need of support can meet states which are can provide this support. And China is, for instance, one of the states which is participating in the work of the convention. I mean, it's observer, not as a state party, but as observer for many years now. There are Chinese delegations which join the meetings and basically follow the work. So there is no really sanction. I mean, although the convention provides for this possibility, we can do that. We can really have a special session if necessary, special meeting of the states parties on a specific case. Usually the first attempt to solve the problem is cooperation, communication, dialogue. And the states even established a special committee. It's like a standing committee of limited number, chaired by the chair of the annual meeting of the states parties, which is called Committee on Cooperative Compliance, which is exactly focusing on these cases where there is a case of alleged probably non-compliance with the convention, and tries to solve them through dialogue. Well, we call this convention, together like the Convention on Cluster Munition, a little bit also the CCW, we call them humanitarian disarmament conventions. Why humanitarian disarmament? Disarmament, arms control in general, the field in which we are working, is a balance between the humanitarian perspective and the military advantage. And it's a very difficult balance, because on the one hand you have enormous economic, financial interests, but also national security interests. You should not forget that. And on the other hand, you have the victims. All these civilians or sometimes combatants who may suffer from these weapons. So it's really quite unique, this convention in particular, because probably for a first time, the focus was much more on the humanitarian side, not so much on the military side. And it's really a convention which helps people, which is directly linked with development, which promotes development. We only hope that China will soon join the convention.
Thank you very much.
Most welcome.